Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Loving obeisances unto the Supreme Being Vasudeva, who is everything there is. Janmadyasya yato anvayaditaratascha artheshu abhigyaswarad. Tene brahma hridaya adikavaye muhyanti yat surayah. Tejo vari mridam yatha vinimayo yatra trisargo mrisha. Dhamna swena sada nirastakohakam satyam param dhimahi. We meditate upon the transcendent absolute being from whom springs forth this universe. He is present in all that exists and yet distinct from everything. He is fully conscious and totally independent. He revealed to the first seer Brahma the import of Vedic wisdom. The material creation, made of threefold gunas, appears in him as though real, like water in a mirage. Being eternally self effulgent, he is ever free of the illusion Maya of the material world. We meditate upon him, the Supreme Being. Nigamakalpataror galitam phalam shukamukad amritadrava sanyutam pibata bhagavatam rasamalayam muhuraho rasika bhuvi bhavukaha. O devotees who relish a taste for divine love, Bhagavatam is the fully ripened fruit of the wish-yielding tree of Vedas, flowing as immortal nectar from Shuka Brahma Rishi. Go on drinking the sweet nectar day after day. So now we are entering the fourth chapter of the fifth Skandha of Srimad Bhagavatam. We saw the sacred descent of Rshabha Avatar as the son of King Nabhi after he did a great sacrifice in which the Lord himself appeared and blessed that he will be having a part manifestation as a son, and that is Rshabha Avatar, who comes to give the most wonderful instructions on renunciation. So we continue now. After Lord Rshabha is born, just as it was prophesied, he is found to be having many divine features, both outwardly and inwardly. As he grows up, he is found to have beautiful, radiant personality and very divine features, and also his inner qualities are all very divine. He views everyone alike. He has great regulation of all the senses. He is not given to pleasures of senses, and he is perfect in his activities, and he handles everyone with respect, and therefore he is very perfect in every way. And considering this personality only, which is so exquisite and so worthy of glorification in every way, because of the majesty, the strength, the splendor, the glory, the power and energy. These are the six qualities because of which Nabhi named him as Rishabha. So the word Rishabha, by the way, means the one who is the foremost or one who is the topmost. That's the one meaning of Rishabha. That is why Purusha Rshabha means the greatest among all men, and so on. So Rishabha means the topmost. So here it says Ojasa Balena Shriya Yashasa Virya Shauryabhyam Pita Rishabha iti idam nama chakara. So the father Nabhi gave the name Rishabha because of these qualities, because he had ojas, that is great majesty, bala, strength, shriya, which is splendor, yasha, which is glory, virya, which is power, and shaurya, which is energy. Because of these qualities, Nabhi gave him the name Rishabha, and he was known to have all kinds of great potencies right away. Once, for instance, it is said that the mighty Indra did not send any rain to their kingdom because of his envy, because he saw Indra as is always symbolic of this um, being the head of the Devas. He is still envious of the Supreme Being, and this is seen in many instances. So here also, Indra is envious and does not send rain, but Rishabha was able to bring forth rain by his yogic powers when he was very young, and therefore the whole kingdom was very pleased with Rishabha, and the king Nabhi was especially pleased. He was full of excessive joy and fondness for the child. He was always taking care of this child Rishabha with great love, and eventually coming to know very soon, even when Rishabha was very young, that all the citizens and all the ministers and all the priests, all of them want Rishabha to be the king because they all love him. This is very similar to what happens in Ramayana, where Dasharatha recognizes that the whole kingdom wants Ram to be the king, and therefore he wants to coronate Ram. Of course, there many events happen, and that's the whole story of Ramayana, which will come later in Bhagavatam. But here, there is no obstacle to the coronation. So Nabhi is very happy to see the whole kingdom wanting Rshabha Deva to be the king, and therefore on a fine day he decides to coronate Rshabha Deva as the king. And then Nabhi, in keeping with the grand tradition of his grandfather Priyavrata and others, he also retires to Badrinath, which is also called Vishal, Badri Vishal, along with his spouse Meru Devi, and they both engage in austerities in the place that is made famous by Nara Narayana. As we saw already in the fourth Skandha, there are two sages, Nara and Narayana, who are manifestations of the Supreme Being, who are said to perform austerities in Badrinath for a very long time, and therefore they sanctify the whole place. And to this Badrinath or Badri Vishal retires King Nabhi with his wife Meru Devi, and therefore he is glorified by a couple of shlokas. It is said, who can compare with the great royal sagely King Nabhi, who was blessed with having the Supreme Lord Sri Hari himself as his son, and who could match Nabhi in terms of how he took care of his kingdom and took care of all the saintly and sagely people and brahmanas in his kingdom, and that thereby he was glorified. So we saw how Priyavrata, his grandfather, was glorified in a similar way because he also retired as a great devotee, and he is also glorified in a similar way because he, due to his devotion, had the Supreme Lord as a son Rishabha and installed him and retired for abidance in devotion. Whereas in between, the father Agnidhra, which is the son of Priyavrata, we saw how he was attached to his wife till the end, and therefore he went to the heavenly realm to be with her, and thereby we don't see any glorification of him as we saw with Priyavrata or now with Nabhi. So this is what Bhagavatam always emphasizes, that the ultimate purpose of the especially the ending aspect or ending phase of one's life is to go into sannyasa, which is inner renunciation. If one is still attached to household bondages or relations till the end, then such a person may even enjoy pleasures till the end or even in the afterlife, but he has to come back to suffer the consequences and not be liberated. So here Nabhi is liberated because he did it the right way, and he installed Rishabha as the king and went off to Badrinath. Now Rishabha takes over, and the Lord, he is perfect in every way. So he's still young, as we saw. So he is doing some time he is spending in Gurukul. Gurukul is the name for the residence of the Guru or the preceptor. So just to set the right example, he spends time in the residence of his Guru. It's called Gurukula Vas. So he does Gurukula Vas, and then after honoring the Gurus properly and according to their blessings, he comes back to the kingdom and he performs all kinds of activities perfectly. Both the religious activities as well as the royal duties are all performed perfectly. Then he is bestowed with a consort called Jayanti by Indra himself. The very same Indra who was very envious of him now recognizes his greatness, especially after the incident where he withheld rain, and Rishabha Deva was able to handle that very effortlessly, and thereby Indra was very happy, and therefore he bestows Jayanti as the consort of Rshabha Deva. And it is said that Rshabha Deva and Jayanti had 100 sons, And the first of them is very important. He's called Bharata. The next episode of Bhagavatam, after the next few chapters of Rshabha Deva, is about Bharata. So here he is introduced. First of all, Bharata is the very reason the whole nation of Bharat is called so. The word Bharat comes from Bharata. There are many famous characters called Bharata, one being, of course, the younger brother of Sri Ram, but he comes much later. And he is not the reason why the land is called Bharat, because this Bharata comes well before. He is one of the greatest kings, and we will see his story later after Rshabha Deva's story. But here it's mentioned that this Bharata, the first son of Rshabha Deva, is a great yogi and a great king, and because of him, the land is called Bharat. It says, Yesham Kalu Mahayogi Bharato Jeshtha Shreshta Guna Asid Yena Idam Varsham Bharatam Iti Vyapadeshanti. So, by him, this land Varsham Bharatam Iti Vyapadeshanti. It's called as Bharat because he is a Mahayogi, great yogi, Jeshtaha, the senior most, and Shreshta Gunaha, with excellent virtues. Then after Bharata, there were 9 brothers who were also disposed to royal duties. Their names are given. Then after, so these are 10. So therefore, Bharat and including Bharat, there are 10 brothers, the first 10 who are very disposed to royal duties. After that come 9 brothers who are very important again. They come way later in the 11th canto, 11th Skandha, because they are called Nava Yogis, 9 yogis. So their names are very important. It comes later, but their names are given here: Kavi, Hari, Antariksha, Prabuddha, Pippalayana, Avirhotra, Drumila, Chamasa, Karabhajana. These 9 are eminent devotees and yogis, and they have a wonderful discourse that they give, which is being related to Vasudeva, the father of Krishna himself, by Narada. So, in the 11th Skandha, after the ending of, or toward the end of Krishna Leela, there is an episode where Krishna's own father, Vasudeva, is instructed by Narada. Narada, being the great compassionate sage, he instructs everyone very beautifully. And there, Narada has a conversation, a dialogue with Vasudeva, the father of Vasudeva, Krishna. So, when he instructs Vasudeva, he narrates the story of the 9 yogis, which is called Navayogi Upakhyanam. These 9 are those 9 yogis. So, their story is related much later, even though they are here now, and their activities happen now, but it is not coming in Bhagavatam till the 11th Skandha, where their story is narrated. In fact, we see how Bhagavatam also plays with time in so many ways, where we saw in the very beginning, the first Skandha, the last portions of Krishna Leela, after the war is over and Krishna going back to Dwaraka and so on. And the entire beginning of Krishna Leela comes way later in the 10th Skandha. Similarly, here the 9 yogis are mentioned, but their activities are not mentioned. They are later relayed by Narada as something that happened way before, which is now in this part of Bhagavatam. And then the other remaining 81 sons of Jayanti were all very disciplined and they lived almost like saintly people, it is said. So, the Lord who was called Rishabha, so now we go back to focusing on the father who is the father of these 100 sons, starting with Bharata. So Rishabha, he is called Rishabha because he is entirely, as we said, Rishabha means the topmost or the foremost, and it very fittingly is so because he is completely independent. He is always free from all evils, and he ever enjoys absolute bliss, and he is ever the Supreme Lord himself. So we saw that he is a manifestation of the Supreme Being. So it is said here, Kevalananda Anubhava Ishvara Eva. He is always in pure bliss, Kevalananda Anubhava, and Ishvara, he is the Supreme Lord, being Krishna, or the Supreme Narayana himself, and therefore he is called as Rishabha, the topmost, and he taught everyone by action, by example, what needs to be done. So he was always equipoised. He was calm, he was controlled, he was friendly, he was compassionate. He showed everyone how to live household life. He was a proper, perfect king first, and he ruled the kingdom. As we saw, he had 100 sons. He had a very grand family life as well, with so many children, and raising the children beautifully, and dealing with the kingdom beautifully. And finally, of course, he moves toward the phase of renunciation, which will come soon. But here he shows by example how to live for all householders, because as Bhagavatam says, the world follows whatever is done by men of top rank in society. This is why leaders are so important, because leaders set example. Today we see this much wanting, where leaders mostly, maybe with a few exceptions, are not worth following in any way, and therefore the society is also completely confused. Whereas if the leader is setting the right example, then that automatically sets the society right. So Bhagavatam says the world follows whatever is done by men of top rank, and that's what Rishabha set by example. Krishna says the same in the Bhagavad Gita too, in the 3rd chapter. He says, Sayat pramanam kurute lokastad anuvartate. He tells Arjuna there too that Arjuna, you have to act properly, not just because of you, your own sake, but because the whole world will follow you, you being a great leader. Whatever the great leaders set as the example, Sayat pramanam kurute lokaha tad anuvartate. The world follows that. So that's what Rishabha also implicitly recognizes, and therefore he, anyway, being the supreme lord, he was perfect in all qualities, and he also naturally set the right example for the whole world. He knew all the truth of the Vedas. He was very proficient in all the codes of dharma. He ruled the kingdom very properly, and he honored the brahmanas and the sages and everyone perfectly, and he ruled with the right principles of persuasion and other qualities. He performed all the various sacrifices that are necessary, and he knew exactly what to do, when to do, what time and place, what kind of people have to be involved, what materials, everything. So it is said that when Rshabha Deva was ruling the kingdom, everything was perfect. No one sought anyone else's property or wealth. Nobody coveted anything. And the only thing was, everybody was having intense and profound love for their ruler. And this was the case when Rishabha Deva was ruling. And with this kind of glory and fame, Rishabha ruled the kingdom. And once Rishabha Deva gathered his sons, and there was an assembly, and there he gave detailed instructions, which are now given, which are very important part of the teachings of Rishabha. So this, we enter the 5th chapter of the 5th Skandha of Bhagavatam. Rishabha says to all his sons, he assembles all his sons and he gives this advice. He says, first recognize that the human body is not meant to just enjoy sensual pleasures, because the sensual pleasures can be had even by animals. All dogs and swines can also have sensual pleasures. So the human body is meant to sublime austerities whereby the mind is purified, and the purity of mind is what is necessary for absorption in the absolute. And how do we purify the mind? He says a very direct way. He says one do and one don't. The do is to seek the association and service to exalted beings, and the don't is to avoid the fellowship of those who are attached to the world. So this is always what Bhagavatam emphasizes again and again. Rshabha Deva also says service to exalted souls is the gate to liberation, and fellowship of those who are worldly is the opening to hell. Therefore, those who are even minded, calm and composed, free from anger, and very exceptionally peaceful, and those who only regard divine love as the highest pursuit, who do not enjoy the company of worldly men, such are the people who are truly to be honored and revered. So one has to be very clear, what does it mean to say associate with exalted souls? These are people with equanimity. That's the main thing. Samachittaha, it says. Krishna also says in the Gita, Samatvam yoga uchyate. Equanimity is yoga. So that is true yoga. Here also he says samachittaha, the mind is equanimous, prashanta, supremely peaceful and free from anger and kind hearted, and such exalted beings with no attachment to the body or relations or to wealth or any of that, such beings are the exalted beings, and therefore one has to glorify them. And he says a person, when he chooses to gratify his senses, he commits a big mistake, because these are due to attachment to the body, which is the source of misery. The nature of the soul, the nature of oneself, is veiled due to this attachment. So he says the jiva who does not inquire into the truth of the spirit, who truth of his own being, is attached to the body and therefore is engaged in activities, and these activities act as a veil that prevent from seeing his true nature. And being veiled by ignorance, he is prone to further and further activity, and therefore he is caught in bondage. He says karmatmakam ena sharira bandha. It is the bondage of the bodily attachment due to further and further activities. But then he says one who, therefore, if one develops love for the great supreme lord, then he can be free. But if one is not having this love for Lord Vasudeva, who is me, because Rshabha Deva is the supreme being, he says, one who has no love for me, who I am Vasudeva, then the jiva is always identified with the body. He says, Pritir na yavan mayi Vasudeve nam muchyate deha yogena tavat. So he has a nice expression here, deha yoga. Yoga means to be one. Normally it is used in a divine context. To be one with the supreme being is yoga, true yoga. But deha yoga means to be one with the body, which is not a good thing. So he says, in a very nice twist of the word, one is in deha yoga or body yoga until one has supreme abiding love for the supreme lord. So he says, as long as the jiva does not come to his senses and realize that all the activities of the senses are unreal, he gets caught in these enjoyments and he gets caught in the knot in the heart. So this is called as Hridaya Granthi, as it is said here. Hridaya Granthi means the knot in the heart, which is the knot between pure consciousness and the body. It's also called Chit Jada Granthi. This knot is what keeps one in bondage, and then he gets attached to family relationships, and then he regards house and properties and kinsmen and wealth all as his own. And only when the knot gets loose, then he can turn back on these attachments and be free. And then he gives a list of things which are necessary to remove this knot. So these instructions are very beautiful again and very similar to what Sanat Kumar gave Prithu Maharaj. They are exactly similar. He gives a list of things. He says, by adoring me, the Supreme Lord and the pure self, by being free of thirst for enjoyment, by being equanimous towards opposites, that is heat and cold, pleasure and pain, by realizing that the embodied being is always having misery of different kinds, through a spirit of inquiry, through austerity and asceticism, by abstaining from actions with motives, by doing actions only for my sake, by hearing about my stories, by fellowship of those who take me as the supreme being, by singing my praises, by even mindedness, by being tranquil, by being free of enmity, by an intent to give up identifying with the body and house as oneself, by a careful study of the scriptures dealing with self knowledge, by living in solitude, by regulating breath and the senses and the mind, by intense faith and sincerity in saints and holy books, by celibacy, by vigilance, by control of the tongue, by wisdom that is illuminated with the realization to perceive my presence everywhere, by meditation, and by firmness, diligence, and discretion. By all of this, O my sons, a clever man can tear apart the veil called ego. So this is the most beautiful, again, instructions, very similar to Sanat Kumar, a very exhaustive set of things every single thing is very beautiful and very important to carefully pay attention to. Many of these are in fact exactly similar to what Sanat Kumar said. They are more or less the same. He says same in the same way, Dvandva Titikshaya, putting up with opposites, and then Jignasaya, spirit of inquiry, Tapasa by austerities, Mat Khataya by listening to my stories, Nirvaira Samyo Pashamena, without any enmity and being pleasant all the time, Jihasaya Deha Geha Atma Buddhe, to give up the attitude of taking the body and the house and rest as oneself. Dehatma Buddhi means to take the body as the self. Jihasaya Deha Geha Atma Buddhi means to give up such attitude. And then he says similarly, Brahmacharyena, as we said, through celibacy, Yamena Vacham, by having regulation of the tongue, Yogena by yoga, Jnanena by true wisdom, and so on. And most importantly, he says, Mad Deva Sangat Guna Kirtananme, by being associated with those who take me to be the supreme deity, and by engaging in glorification of the supreme being. So by all these various aspects, one can tear apart the veil of the ego by remaining vigilant. So that's the most important thing he says. One has to be vigilant all the time and shake off all these various veils, which is essentially the knot in the heart, Hridaya Granthi, as he said, and thereby he can be free. And therefore he says the real duty of a king, because he is now addressing his sons and with Bharata there, so he says the real duty of a king or a father or a guru is to therefore instruct his ignorant subjects and not urge them to get caught up in actions. This is very important. We have seen over and over in Bhagavatam, Narada also instructing Prachina Barhi again that getting caught in activities which are unnecessary is a sure way to bondage. So he says, Na yojayet karmasu karma mudhan. So people are generally ignorant and are always busy with activities. So the real guru, the real king, the real father is one who doesn't make his subjects or his pupils or his children engage in unnecessary activities chasing this and that, but gives them the freedom of mind that recognizes that activities are only to keep the body and soul together, and one's highest pursuit is in contemplation and in recognition of the Supreme Being. And also, importantly, he says, by not getting impatient with them, by not being angry with them if they are not able to perceive it, but by being very patient and compassionate with them. Otherwise, men will always crave for objects of sense enjoyments because of the lust for enjoyment, and they are blind to their own well being. He says nicely, so the right leader is the one who can lead the blind properly rather than encouraging them to say they can figure out their own way and let them go in through a dark path, which is what they are naturally prone to go. So the right leader, the right father, the right teacher is one who doesn't force them, who doesn't get angry or impatient with them, but at the same time who doesn't let them act according to their own devices, but instead guides them very calmly, passionately, compassionately, and lovingly, that the right way is to not get caught in activities and desires, but to engage in true inquiry and true devotion and surrender. And he says, finally, by concluding all this, that if one doesn't do that, then he is not a guru, not a father, not a king. It's a very nice verse. He says, Guru nasyat, vajano nasyat, pita nasyat, janani nasyat, daivam na tatsyat, patischa nasyat, mochayedya samupetam mrityam. So he says, one is not a guru, one is not a father, one is not a even a deity if one doesn't teach this. And then he says, there are all the various beings, and every aspect of this universe should be considered as divine. And then he addresses the assembly and says, I have taken this human semblance out of my own free will to bring forth dharma, and therefore this is why people call me Rishabha. He says here beautifully, idam shariram mama durvibhavyam sattvam hime hridayam yatra dharmaha prishthe kruto me yadad dharma arad atohi mam rishabham prahur aryaha. Aryaha means noble people. The noble people call me Rishabha because I am the abode of dharma and free of adharma, free of unrighteousness, established in pure sattva and come of my own will. And you are all sons who have come from my own heart. And this Bharata, who is your eldermost brother, he addresses the assembly and says, he is very pious, he is a very noble soul, and therefore he instructs them that you have to serve him, because now Rishabha is getting ready to hand over to Bharata and move on to his last stage of renunciate life. So he says to his sons, you have to serve your brother as you served me, and you have to help him in discharging the duties because he is a very noble soul and an able successor. And recognize that we have to especially honor these sages and saints and brahmanas. He says all beings are to be revered. Plants are there which are superior to, he says, inanimate objects. Animals are superior to plants. Humans are superior to animals because there is greater and greater manifestation of consciousness. And then he says, greater than humans are the various heavenly beings such as Gandharvas, Siddhas, and then Devas, and greater than all of them is Shiva, he says very nicely. He says, greater than everyone is Shiva, who ranks the foremost, and Shiva is my own expansion. And then he says, even I, so Shiva, who's my expansion, and I, we honor saints and sages. So he says all this to say that the highest among all entities, greater than even the supreme being, is the saints and sages, because the saints and sages are honored by the Lord himself. So he says, who is greater than them? Nobody is greater. I am pleased when they are pleased. I am happy when they are offered food and gifts rather than any other elaborate rituals, because they are the very embodiment of wisdom, and therefore they carry me in their heart all the time. They are full of truthfulness, compassion, asceticism, wisdom, and endurance, rich in devotion, and they do not even seek anything from me. They never ask me for anything, and therefore I cannot even offer them anything because they are so content in their love and devotion. So you have to honor such sages and saints. Again, this is all an instruction for everyone, that the highest way is to honor those who are entirely free of any attachment, who are the true sagely people. And by honoring them, especially if the kings and the rulers honor them, the whole kingdom is in order. And every one of us ought to also honor such people. And also he says, but also make sure that you honor everyone, because everyone is my own manifestation. That's the right way to live. So this way, he gives a beautiful instruction to all his sons, and then he installs, as we said, his eldest son Bharata as the king, who is called a Parama Bhagavata. He's called Parama Bhagavatam Bhagavat Jana Parayanam. He is a devotee of the devotees of the Lord, a great Bhagavata. And so he is installed by Rishabha as the king now. And then to set the example as a renunciate, Rshabha Deva leaves the kingdom now. So this is the last act of Rshabha Deva. He leaves the kingdom and he goes forth to be a renunciate, taking nothing. After installing his son Bharata as the king, Rshabha Deva leaves without nothing but his body as a possession, taking the very space as his dress, it is said. So he doesn't even wear a shred of cloth. He is going as a naked Baba, as a what is called as a Avadhuta or a Digambara, one who doesn't have anything except the very space as his body. And he goes outside his kingdom now. And once he leaves his kingdom, now we trace him, and we see, Bhagavatam says that he walked around completely with no attachment to anything, and he was alone. He didn't carry anyone, anything, any sign that he was this great king. And because he went outside the kingdom, nobody recognized him, and therefore he was seen as a stupid, blind, or deaf, or a madman because he was silent. He never spoke a word. He was walking around. And it is said that people were actually abusing him, because when this is seen even recently, when great uh, persons, great jnanis come forth, the world doesn't understand them, and many times they end up abusing them too. So it is said that he was physically harmed. He walked through towns and villages and gardens and cowherd encampments, forests, mountains, many different places, and wherever people were there, they were insulting him just as small flies would insult a wild elephant. So an elephant doesn't get bothered by the flies insulting, it just keeps on going. Similarly, he went on going without being insulted by anyone, though they were insulting him. This is an extremely important teaching for all of us, because insult is only taken when we have an image by which we are insulted. Others throwing insults doesn't touch us if we are not attached to any image. So the power of an insult lies only in the attachment we have to our image, which is contrary to the insult, and the same with flattery. So when anyone insults or flatters, it can land only when we have an image, and that is either boosted or hurt by the insult or the flattery. So if there is no self image of any kind, if there is no ego, then there is nothing that can be insulting, there is nothing that can be flattering to. And this is the state of Rshabha Deva. He was not affected by any insult as he roamed around. And very interestingly, there were also those who were very attracted to him at the same time, because his features were so radiant, as we saw. It's only even more radiant now that he has no clothes and he was walking around with this radiant body shining like gold, and his limbs are shining, and his features are very perfect, and his eyes are radiant, and his face is with full of this glow of enlightenment, and therefore so many were attracted to him and glorifying him, and yet so many were insulting him because of his activities. Both were happening, but he was completely untouched, because he had no image of him that can either be flattered or insulted. So this way he went on going around, and then at some point he recognized that the world cannot understand him anyway, and he was not inclined to speaking any further. So he decided to live like a python. It is said a python doesn't bother much to go here and there, but just stays in one place, and whatever comes of its own accord, it eats it and then just lives. So this python is in fact given as one of the gurus by Avadhuta, which comes much later in Bhagavatam. So, like a python, he just didn't bother even going around asking for food or looking for food. He just remained in one place and ate whatever came by providence, and thereby he lived a very perfect example for a renunciate life. And therefore, it is said that by adopting the way of living as a perfect yogi, Rishabha Deva, who is the dispenser of final beatitude, who is the dispenser of moksha, liberation, he was endowed in the fullest measure with everything, and he had no veil of ignorance whatsoever. Therefore, he was Lord Vasudeva himself, and he was completely free in the way he lived. And not only that, he did not even welcome yogic powers that came his way. There were many yogic powers that came his way. Initially, as we saw, he was able to even bring forth rain, but later now, as he is living the life of a renunciate, many yogic powers came unasked, but he did not welcome them, and he did not even bother with these yogic powers, and he simply remained as a renunciate, living completely unaffected or unbothered with whatever was happening in the world, in his complete blissful state of self abidance. So, with this chapter ends. We will see the last portion of Rishabha Deva leaving the earth in the next chapter. For now, we saw the beautiful instructions of Rshabha Deva to his sons, and also after he leaves the kingdom, how he lives as the perfect renunciate of the highest order. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.